So in the last video, we finished the texturing for the main glass facade as well as the retail area down below. What we're going to look at now is how we can texture these balustrades, because there are a couple of different techniques that we can use. So let's isolate that object and let's go ahead and make our material. For the diffuse, we're going to choose the diffuse, which is called balustrade_diffuse. And for the opacity, we have the corresponding opacity map called balustrade opacity. So these two will give us a V-Ray material showing that balustrade with the openings cut out. We could at this point go and create some reflection to it, adding that. We could also give it a bump by just copying the texture across to the bump, just rounding off the edges a little bit. But I think that since our camera will be quite far away from this area, we're not really going to see that detail. So I'm going to leave it as a plain object there. Now let's just have a look at this bump texture that we're at the diffuse texture that we're using. If we view it over here, we can see that it is roughly a 2:1 proportion or ratio of length to width. So what we're going to do in this case is we will add a face mapping using UV. So type UV enter and go down to face. Now what is going to happen, instead of us using a box map, or instead of us breaking the entire object up into separate levels that we can texture or at least UV map individually, we're going to work on the entire whole, just so that we are left still with the editable spline that we can manipulate as a whole, since that flexibility is really one of the key benefits to having a conceptual architectural model. You want to be able to edit single entire objects as easily as possible. So let's get right into the texturing part. Before we actually can texture it, we need to add an editable poly, and we need to start subdividing these faces. Now just before we do that, we also notice that the faces are facing in the wrong direction. So let's click on polygon, Control A, and let's flip those around first. Then let's go back to our edges and let's select all of the edges here, and we're going to connect them a couple of times, just until you see the proportion being more or less equal to the texture. Now you can go and do the sides as well. We're just going to do the ones at the top. You can go and fill in, doing the same process for the ones down below. So about there should be fine. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to apply that texture, and let's have a look at the result. You'll notice here that everything worked out just fine for this part. For each polygon, we have that texture mapped once. It's not really stretched too much, even though I do admit it is stretched maybe about 30%, so we could add more lines into here, more polys. But when you turn the corner, you'll notice that these ones are sitting upside down, and that is something that can be corrected relatively quickly. All you have to do is remember which ones are facing in the wrong direction, go back into your edit poly, select those, and go up into your modifiers and then just type UV, and then unfortunately I can't get it into the screen for you, but you just go down to UVWX form, and once you have that, you just type 180 into your rotation. Then when you go and view your model, you'll notice that it still needs to be rotated here. So let's just check that that is correct. You'll see that it is rotating. So let's just rotate that the right way. It should be sitting this way. And there you have it. You have those three faces which were rotated. You have all of your texture now pointing in the right direction. Now that same process just needs to apply to the other faces, and I believe all of the ones that are here on the left as well. So you can go and do that manually. It's a bit of a touch-up. There is another a way of working around it by creating a multi-sub-material, and you can just have a ID of 1 for all of these, and you can add these as an ID of 2. But the same process really happens. You still have to select those faces that are flipped upside down, and you still have to do some local manipulation just to make sure that everything is rotated in the direction that you want. So because of the opacity, this is going to render out without this gray part in the middle. So that is really enough. We could go and shell this entire object to add some depth. It would be a good idea to do that, since you may want to see some balustrade depth. Perhaps 5 centimeters is good enough for a handrail. Then you'll see as well what happens is that everything else has now been undone. So let's see if we can slide that up to the top there. So the shell modifier doesn't or at least undo what work we've done earlier on. Great, you get the idea. So once we are done with the balustrades, the other materials in the scene are going to be done in a slightly more simple approach than the glass facades were done. All that we will do here is we will add materials for the timber promenade. We'll add a plain white texture to these tent objects. We'll add a steel frame texture similar to the one we used for the retail facade. We'll add that to the support poles that are here, and perhaps a couple of details like these poles here. This soccer mesh, the soccer net basically, that will protect the ball from going overboard. We will add a mesh texture to that and opacity, very similar to how we did the balustrades. All of the slabs I will just do a plain gray, as well as these slabs for the podium. They will all just be a plain gray color. I won't really bother with doing too many textures there, since I want to keep a quite conceptual looking model. I want us to focus on the materials that were used for this glass facade. That is really going to be the key standout for this project, as well as the soccer field that we have floating on top here. So those materials I'm going to set up on the side. I'm not going to do that in front of camera, since I've covered the complex ones, and I believe that with your experience you're very capable of already doing the same thing and adding the basic materials to the rest of the objects. So that is it for this video. We have covered the texturing and UV mapping for the balustrade, flipping the UVs upside down, or at least rotating using the UVW X form. So that would be a great benefit to any type of local UV texturing that you may do. The next video will be about setting up the daylight as well as nighttime lighting for the scene, and after that we are pretty much ready to roll.